session on multimedia journalism. I'm just going to give about a minute or so of people to start trickling in, just especially if you're coming in from previous sessions beforehand. But it's an absolute pleasure today to be joined by Debbie, Dan and Kat, and our presenter Matthew. For any of you who, if this may be your first session at the Student Opportunities Festival, this is roughly what it's going to look like. So we're in a Zoom webinar, which means that we can't see you. So if you're having your dinner or you're having a conversation, feel free to continue. We can't hear you, but you can interact with us through the chat and the Q&A. If you see a question in the Q&A that you want to ask and it's already been asked, just give it an upvote and we'll know to try and get to that one a little bit quicker. We will also try to finish the session at roughly 10 to the hour, just to give time to swap over to go to the coffee chat for the kind of informal part of the session, and also just to give speakers from the next sessions coming in a little time to prepare. And just to please note, the session is being recorded, so if you do have any questions that you don't perhaps want answered live, it might be a really good place then to ask those at the coffee table, or table 1 at the coffee shop. And if you have any additional questions or you want to chat with our wider audience, we're Student Ops Fest on Twitter. It's probably the best place to do that. We've had loads of tweets already from different sessions, and it's just lovely to get everybody's opinions of how they found the festival so far. So with that, I will hand over to Matthew, who is our resident multimedia person. He is SPA, but this is a collaboration between ourselves at SPA, SRA, who is the Student Radio Association, and NASA, who is the National Student TV Association. There's a lot of acronyms there to keep track of. But Matthew is involved with student media. He is the incoming editor-in-chief of Motley magazine, which is Cork and Ireland's resident publication. And also, just before we begin, I would like all of us, if you can join me just in congratulating Matthew, that a few days ago he actually found out that he was named Radio Journalist of the Year in Ireland's Student Media Awards 2020. So congratulations, Matthew, and over to you.
You're very good. Thanks very much. It's a real pleasure to be here, and it's a real pleasure to meet all of you. I've heard so much about you, and it's going to be a wonderful session. Today we have Kat Soave from Sky News, Daniel Orton from the Wall Street Journal, and Debbie Ramsay from BBC Newsbeat. So they're all saying hello to you wherever you are. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody in the audience, wherever you're zooming in from. And obviously hello to you guys as well. I'm really excited about kind of a very stimulating conversation about multimedia journalism, even through these rather dystopian means. So my first question goes to all of you. We're going to do them in alphabetical order. So Kat will go first, then Daniel, then Debbie, for the first 25 minutes, and then the second 25 minutes of the audience participation. But I suppose in a journalistic space where the average media consumer's attention span is lessening, how do we as journalists, through multimedia output, ensure that there is a healthy transition from old consumption habits to new consumption habits? In essence, how do we prevent ourselves from creating fast food journalism, easily consumed, but without as much informative nutrition as before?
Well, from a radio point of view, I can only speak from my experience, is that you've got to make your bulletin sound snappy, but you've got to make sure that everything is in that bulletin. At Sky News Radio, we only do 2-minute bulletins. I know that's different across the entire network. Some do 4 minutes, some do 15 minutes, you know, it just totally depends. So it's all about grabbing their attention by making that headline snappy, but making sure you're factually correct, because you cannot compromise on the truth. Also, what's important is I think a lot of people think we need to balance both sides in every single script we do. So if we have Boris Johnson talking about something, we then need to have Sir Keir Starmer talking about the same thing. In the same script, not necessarily. General output, it is important that you do show that you are balanced in some way, so that you're not seen to be favouring one political party or another. But yeah, it's all about making sure that you are factually correct whilst grabbing their attention. In audio, it's quite easy to do that. You've got different voices. You can bring in voxes, you know, little vox pops from different people across the country. Balance that with the professionals or the experts. And then you've got a whole mix of people talking about the same thing. But offering different perspectives, I think, is also really important as well.
It's very interesting. And I suppose radio and video as mediums offer, very, very different kind of outputs as compared to print. And I suppose I'd be interested now to get Dan's perspective on the same question, on the opposite side, on the video side. So it'd be very interesting to find out what your thoughts on that transition are.
Well, I was just nodding along to a lot of what Kat was saying there. I completely agree. It is, I mean, you can create factually correct, very detailed, compact, for me, video packages that are still, that are short and snappy, and you don't lose any of that sort of journalistic vigor, I think, in distilling sometimes very complicated, complex, big stories down to, as in Kat's case, these 2-minute broadcasts. For me, I'd produce sort of 90-second news videos every day, and the challenge every day is how do we get this entire story into a 90-second video, and it can be done. You've got, I mean, the advantage of video is you've got, if you've got strong visuals, start with those. You catch the viewer's eyes. You've got a strong talking head from someone. You've got something from Donald Trump or Boris Johnson or a protester that you can kick things off with to catch someone's attention. That is vital, and you'd obviously lead with that. So yeah, there's similar challenges there, but it absolutely still can be done, without sacrificing any sort of journalistic integrity or the essence of the story.
Of course, and Debbie, at Newsbeat, you're obviously dealing with a younger demographic. So, in the same sense, how do you maintain that balance? Obviously, I think the younger people are nowadays, the attention span, as a general rule, is decreasing. So, is there?
Yeah, I think it is, but I think it's careful not to make that assumption for everything and on all platforms. And it's about kind of just trying to make sure that you're not making all your platforms do everything. There are different ways of telling that story on the different platforms. So as Kat said, if it's a bulletin, it needs to be punchy, accurate, and grab people's attention. But in contrast to that, in the program, the 15-minute program that we do, we would then expand it out to 2 minutes, which is also still short and punchy, but you can go into more detail. And with regards to video, it's a slightly different forum of telling the story. So you do, as Dan says, you put the punchiest thing, you don't wait till the end, you put it in the beginning, so you get people to come in that way. And it's about remembering that you're still telling a story, even if you're doing it in a short space of time. So say if you were doing an Instagram story, you're still probably going to use a maximum of 10, and that's a lot, between 5 and 10 slides, but you still need to make sure that you are telling it as a progressive story that people can follow, and you get those main points in. So it's about making those different platforms work for you as a journalist in different ways, I would say.
Absolutely. Very interesting discussion around that. And I suppose moving on to the second question, in terms of video journalism and radio journalism as mediums, they both come with their own distinct set of advantages and disadvantages. And what I'd be interested to know is, what have you found most beneficial as a medium in terms of utilizing it to your chosen medium, in Debbie and Kat's case in radio, and Dan with video? And also, conversely, is there a certain liability to the medium that you use as well?
Well, obviously the drawbacks with radio is that nothing's visual, and you can't illustrate a story other than with words and audio. So it's very important that what you do really sets the tone. You can use effects. If, let's say, there's a march, like a Black Lives Matter march, use effects to sort of paint the scene visually, and then go into speech and then have speakers. Obviously, pictures are very powerful, and that's something that we don't get as radio journalists. But I think, yeah, it's important to incorporate all your different tools as someone that works with audio and with scripts. Also, I think with radio, certainly what we do at Sky News is that we do podcasts as well. So I'm sometimes responsible for producing the Sky News Daily podcast. And then, as Debbie has said, with her 15-minute programs, you can really draw out those stories that don't have to be 2 minutes. You can spend 15, 20, 25 minutes on a story. And that's really important. It's about using all those techniques that you learn whilst you're a student or whilst you're learning your craft as an audio journalist, and putting them to different uses. Because if you can put together a news bulletin, you can then put together a news podcast as well. Also, sorry if I'm going on. We also use on-demand service as well. Again, it's a similar thing. It's we can use longer scripts, we can use longer bits of audio, and then upload them to Alexa, Google Home, those sort of things. And yeah, it's about illustrating those stories in a way that doesn't require the words on a page or the pictures on a screen.
Of course. Thanks very much. And then over to Dan.
Video is incredibly beneficial as a medium to journalists these days, I think. That's not really a groundbreaking thing to say. You can really enhance a story with visuals. Kat mentioned the Black Lives Matter protests, and obviously there are some incredibly strong visuals of that those protests kicked off because of the killing of George Floyd, which was captured on camera. A story that might not have been as it would be possible without the existence of video. Video is so vital these days, I think, to telling stories on a number of different platforms. Obviously, I work predominantly creating content for Twitter, but obviously video works very well on all the other social media platforms as well as on platform on people's websites. And you don't necessarily need as much in the way of a written script. You can let pictures tell their own story, which is great. Not necessarily a drawback, but certainly a challenge to want to consider, as with all sources when working on journalism, is the veracity of the video you're using. Like we still have to go through the process of making sure what we're looking at is actually real and happened. And you can't just start putting on any old video just because someone says this is what it is. We live in an age of fake news and deep fakes, and that'll be something even more challenging into the future, I think.
Yeah, it's going to be a really challenging time, I think, for journalists, particularly with the political context at the moment. When you look at, say, a nation like Russia, trying to affect the West, and with the Cambridge Analytica scandal, the manipulation of mass media and also social media is going to be a very touchy ground for journalists to try and navigate, I believe. Over to you, Debbie.
I guess I think both those platforms are really exciting as a journalist. So if you are doing radio, the challenge and the thing to get good at is that cliche of painting a picture with words. And it is a real skill to actually be able to write in a way that people speak, not read, that speak, the way they speak, and draw them in and make them imagine and see what you're talking about. And I find it really quite exciting and quite a good challenge to explore language in that way. And the same for video. I think you can almost kind of get lost and never get to the end of a concise story, because there are so many different ways in which you can visually tell that story. It's a really exciting opportunity and a really good challenge to focus in on what you need and the tools that you need to tell those stories without overdoing it on both mediums and making the story get lost in sound effects or get lost in the visuals or graphics. So I think it's a really good time to be a journalist, because you can express yourself in so many different ways and tell stories in so many different ways and introduce people to other people through your storytelling in such an exciting way. I think it's great.
I suppose in an age driven by clicks and advertising revenue, particularly in commercial media, but also in the context of media digitalizations, how do you as journalists find a healthy balance between newsworthiness and also then with the pressures of today, content engagement?
Well, we don't really deal at Sky News Radio with content engagement so much as what we do is we provide scripts to 250 commercial stations across the UK. They can choose whether to run our stuff or not. So we don't, it's about finding, I think what Debbie said is really important about engaging in a way that people relate to, like writing really complex, say, scientific jargon is stations are not going to use. You need to find the stories that you think your audience will appeal to your audience and to their audiences as well. So we have a whole broad range of stations, from ones that cater to younger people to ones that cater to much older people, and it's about offering a service that will cater to all of those and making it accessible for everyone. So I can't really answer on engagement because we don't monitor either what stations use, because it would just be way too time consuming. But we get a sense of what stations are interested in. A lot of the time it's about children, families, those sort of thing. And as a disclaimer, we're not paid ever to feature a story. That's not what broadcast media is about. You're not paid to feature a story. I think that you shouldn't really get into it if that's what you're about. So yeah, it's identify who your audience is, what will appeal to them. Maybe talk to someone in that audience if you're not part of it, and see what they're interested in and cater to that.
Thanks very much. Over to Dan.
Well, I don't think anything has fundamentally changed as to what is newsworthy, or how we decide what is newsworthy in the last 20 or so years. You still look at a story and all of them sort of have the same. We apply the same basic news value to them to decide on whether to pursue it. What Kat said is, I agree with completely about audience. What does the audience want? And actually, I suppose in this digital media age, we now have access to so much more data on what our audiences want, and therefore we can tailor perhaps the content in far more easily now. But that doesn't necessarily. So I suppose the audience maybe has more of a role in newsworthiness up to a point, but I don't think anything has changed all that much in how we decide on what stories we're doing and what is deemed newsworthy. And it still, does it have an impact? What is this? What does it mean? Do people need to know this? Is it important? Is there some sort of conflict involved? Those things still apply.
Yeah, I suppose, like, with regards to you, Debbie, I know it's slightly different in that you're a public service broadcaster, but I'm wondering, is there still at times, a balance today between what is newsworthy, but also what's going to drive engagement, and I suppose help the BBC to further build up its audience in a sense?
I guess we approach it kind of sort of twofold, really. It's all focused ruthlessly on the audience and what they want, their lives, reflecting their lives, but also as a public service broadcaster, what we think that actually it's really important for them to know. And I think that's fine. And in terms of engagement, it's about finding a way to tell that story that they think that they might not think they want to know, or that it's important for them to know and understand, because our role is to educate people as well. So we try and make sure that we are using them as much as we can to tell that story, giving them a voice in the stories. And I think, as Dan said, nowadays it's so much easier because there are so many people out there kind of telling their own news and their own stories, that you have footage, you have audio, you can contact people so much more easily and help them make their stories journalistically sound and have more impact. And I think it is really important to be telling the stories on behalf of the audience and using the audience as well.
That's very interesting. Moving on, I suppose now we have a specific question for each of you. Then I'll have a more general question, and then we're going to go over to the audience participation. There's plenty of questions firing in, so I'm sure you'll be kept on your toes. Kat, this one's specifically for you. In the podcasting age and with the convenience produced by that medium, do you believe that podcasts will remain as a radio auxiliary, or do you think that they'll eventually outstep radio as a medium?
I don't think they'll outstep radio as a medium. They're so inextricably linked, but at the same time they're so different. You can have a 10-minute podcast, you could have an hour and a half podcast for news, certainly. And I don't think that people digest them in the same way. So when you're listening to radio, figures show you're usually in the car, or you're listening at the breakfast table or the dinner table, and you're not typically listening for that long. Whereas with a podcast, you are sort of very specifically sitting down to listen to that particular product, and you have sought it out yourself to find information on that topic, or that producer, or that product, essentially. So I don't think that the two are ever, I don't think podcasts are ever going to sort of take over, and that will then be the way of consuming news more so than radio. But I think the two work very harmoniously together, and any aspiring broadcast journalist, audio journalist should really start to be aware of news podcasts and how they digest it, and how they can then tell a story in both ways.
It's very interesting. I suppose it's, that's the value, of the digitization really of modern media, is that we have so many different ways nowadays to tell stories. And I'm particularly interested in that balance between podcasts and radio. So thanks very much for that. Dan, this is a specific question for you. As a video journalist, do you believe it is more imperative for new journalists to have a specific niche in terms of their medium, or would you recommend that they take a more broad approach?
I think the more skills you have, the more attractive you could be to an employer. I think being able to, I know that a lot of publications now, and I'm sure Kat and Debbie can speak for the Sky and BBC on this, but at the Wall Street Journal certainly, and the New York Times and other places like that, they encourage their reporters, traditionally print reporters, to be able to shoot with their mobile phones, to record audio, to really give their stories this kind of extra depth. So I think if you turn up on the doorstep saying, well, I can shoot and I can record audio and I can code and I can do graphics, obviously you're going to be an incredibly attractive candidate if the publication in question is looking for people who can go out and do that sort of stuff. But I don't necessarily think you need to absolutely have those skills when you enter a publication for a particular job. You can still go for a reporter role somewhere and not have those skills. I think an openness and a curiosity though to want to learn that stuff is going to take you a long way in today's media landscape.
Absolutely. And I suppose that's again another consequence of this kind of mass digitalization of the media. I think, back in the day in terms of radio in particular, you would have had a sound engineer, you would have had a producer, a researcher. But nowadays with a lot of shows, especially in smaller stations, it's moved to one person, let's say, doing the job where 4 people used to. So it allows us again to tell stories in a much more varied and in-depth way. Debbie, this is just more a specific question for you, particularly as regards to Newsbeat. So how do you go about making current affairs more accessible to your predominantly younger demographic?
I guess it is just remembering that it's people that are at the heart, I sound like a cliche, but are at the heart of stories. And there will be times where other platforms and other bits of the BBC are using politicians and talking heads to demonstrate their story. And we will more likely be finding that case study who's experienced it to help tell that story for others. Even throughout Brexit, coronavirus, it's always about people for us and the audience, sharing their experiences. even if it's alongside, say, somebody who can help them kind of, negotiate the story, or can help them find work if we're doing unemployment, give tips on mental health and mental well-being. Even if we're complementing it, there are always people at the heart of our stories. That's kind of how we approach it, really. And we also, quite often when we're pitching stories, we have a lot of brainstorming going on in our office, even in the current climate. We're asking ourselves, so would a 23-year-old plumber or hairdresser in Hull or Aberdeen understand this story, get this story, or what would they want to know? So we're always trying to put ourselves in the position of the audience, and then that's where we start to tell the story from. And sometimes that will result in a very simple explainer if we're at that stage of the story, but usually if that happens, then we'll be tackling that story again and then bringing people into it as we go along.
That's wonderfully interesting. I suppose my final question is quite general, but just considering the audience, and even myself as a young journalist, I'm interested to know. So just in terms of finding internships and opportunities for young journalists, would you have specific advice based on your own experiences as one-time upstarts?
I think the radio industry at the moment is quite difficult to get into. We're seeing a massive shrink in the number of jobs available. So please do not underestimate that it will be tough. But my best advice to anyone who does want to get into the industry, it's the best industry there is. Make yourself as available as possible. Make yourself as responsible as possible. That, I've had people not turn up for work experience because they slept in or they went out the night before. Don't do that. I know that sounds obvious, but it just make yourself as professional as you could possibly be. That will make an impact. And just make yourself as available as possible. I had to, in my master's year, give up a lot of my time when I should have been relaxing to go off and chase stories. And that, I think, makes all the difference, is that you are willing and you are setting yourself apart from everyone else. And that's the most important thing.
Thanks very much, Kat. Over to you, Dan.
With the caveat that, as Kat says, it's incredibly tough right now. I think that's quite clear. And also with the caveat on the piece of advice I'm going to give, it's that maybe this isn't so easy in a pandemic. But what I found, the advice I was given and the advice I think was really helpful to me, and what I'd pass on is network. Just reach out, make contacts, reach out to people who are doing stuff that you are interested in doing, and talk to them. I mean, actually, it might be easier to talk to those people now in a pandemic when we're all stuck at home and you can't say that you're going anywhere. Reach out and say, can I have a coffee with you? Can I pick your brains about this? When I was looking for jobs after graduating and trying to get into the television industry, actually at the time, I just, I blitzed everyone I knew. I asked people I knew who they knew, and persistence kind of worked out in the end. And then always remember your contacts as well. Like, keep up that communication.
Thanks very much. And Debbie?
I would say don't underestimate the skills that you have that you probably don't even view as skills. Like, you will be native on social media. So many companies have people in their organizations that don't get social media inherently. So if you are doing good things on your own platforms already, keep doing that and hone those skills. And also, I would say, even though it is difficult at the minute, that you should be, maybe not necessarily, because I get hundreds of emails of people wanting to work at Newsbeat, but that's just not feasible at a time when you're fully staffed. So I always suggest to people, if you come and pitch to me a story that's specific for Newsbeat, then I'm interested. Then I might commission you on the basis of that story, rather than have you got a job? General, have you got a job? It's, you know, then you're demonstrating to me already. If you pitched a really good story, you're demonstrating to me that you know our audience and you know why it's for our audience. You are bringing something that nobody else can bring me, because it's, you know, unique to you. It might be new figures, it might be the crazy case study that's just amazing that only you know about. It, you know, it might be just something really surprising that nobody's thought about, and again, you have the contacts. You know, as Dan says, it's really important to build contacts and speak to people. So sometimes I think in the current climate, don't think to the I want a job here. Think to, okay, what can I do for this organisation at this moment? What can I bring to the table? And you will all have something unique to bring to the table from your lived experience. So yeah, so I just think kind of break it down a bit and always find out about whoever the place that you're pitching to. Because, you know, sometimes I get letters which say news round, news night, yeah, lots of letters that clearly they've just sent out to everybody. You know, and also if you are looking for work, make sure that you are tailoring your CV to what you are looking for. So I I just fed back to somebody who randomly messaged me saying, I want to get into radio production. Well, what does that mean? Do you mean radio? Do you mean music? Do you mean a speech radio? Do you mean news? Do you mean, what do you mean? What side of it do you mean? So be specific. Really think about where you want to go and who you want to learn from and what you want to do, and then kind of go through it in a really focused, specific way, even if it means that you need to tailor your CV 5, 6, 7, 8 times to whoever you're speaking to.
Thanks very much. That's the end of my questions. It's been fantastic so far. So there's a lot of people in the audience. We have about 60 people here, so we have lots of fantastic questions flying in. So the first one is this. In regards to your workflows and the changes that you have had to implement since the start of the COVID-19 crisis, what have you learned as a result? And do you think that your workflows have changed permanently?
I think we've just all had to adapt to what the pandemic is showing. I mean, I would be in the office five days a week, and now I am in the office maybe once or twice a week. Different roles obviously need different technology. So if I'm reading, then I have to be in the office. But if I'm reporting or curating for on demand, then I can do that from home. I think long term, I think that this might be kept up. I'm not 100% sure. I think the workload certainly at the beginning rose a lot because you had to be across every single bit of the story. You had to, all the different weaves of coronavirus, you had to know what was going on, who was saying what, so that nothing was missed. And now as it's sort of we're coming out of that, I think the workload is getting more manageable, but you just have to be as flexible as you can be. I'm not sure if this will continue, whether when we come out of this, we'll then go back to working full-time in the office or not. It's just, yeah, be as adaptable as you can be.
And just a quick message just to the audience, please don't be afraid to fire in your questions. Got 3 fantastic journalists here, ready and willing to answer them, and there's a lot we can all learn from them. Dan, over to you.
I agree with everything Kat just said. I think being adaptable, being flexible is going to be really important going forward. I too can't predict when our workload and workflow is going to return to any, I don't know, sense of normal or a new normal. I've been working from my living room since the middle of March. I'm lucky that my job, I can do that. But it's not going to remain that way. We have to get back to the newsroom at some point. You lose a lot of spontaneous conversations that lead to great stories. You know, the creativity has been stunted somewhat by not being able to just turn around and talk to an editor on the news desk or someone in features about something in terms of video. But when that happens, we're a long way away, I think, from that happening. But yeah, what Kat says, I don't think there's much more to add on that. It's adaptable flexibility, always.
And over to you, Debbie.
Well, I think I'm quite lucky in that my team were sometimes working from home anyway, and they are very good at working remotely and at multimedia. And we there are most jobs you can do from home, but presenting side of it is much better, and the bulletin side of it has to be done in the office, I would say. So we currently have about 4 or 5 in the office, everybody else from home, and they're quite tech savvy, so they're fine. But Dan is right. What you miss is that even when you're all on a Zoom call brainstorming, it's just not the same as sparking up a conversation with somebody you might bump into. I think for me, the future is a bit of a blended working. So currently what I'm doing at the minute is I work a 4-day week. So I do 2 days from the office, 2 days from home. And that kind of suits because you get a bit of interaction with people, albeit from 2 meters away, but you still get that interaction and you still have those conversations. But working from home, you work in a different way. And I think as a manager, for me, what I've learned more is that actually not to be quite so obsessed with the timings. If I give somebody a task to do, which isn't for, linked to a broadcast of the program, as long as they get that task done, then it doesn't matter when they do it. As long as they get that task done when it needs to be done by, it doesn't mean that they need to work 8 to 6. If it works better for them doing a couple of hours from 6 to 8, then going off and doing homeschooling or going off to Pilates or whatever, and then coming back and doing some more, and as long as you get that task done in the time, to not be so kind of driven by those times that aren't linked to broadcast deadlines. So I think it's been good in some ways, and actually the team have been more creative about some things than because they've kind of been forced to look at things from a different angle. But in other ways, that whole connection of team and that whole creativity that is just spontaneous is missed. So I don't think it will just stay working from home.
We got a question in from Chloe, which is quite pertinent for me myself anyway as a radio presenter, but how do you combat nerves when you're conducting an interview with somebody? I think it's a really good question, actually. I know it's a simple one, but it's something I still struggle with.
You've just got to remember they are another person. Does not matter who they are. You could be interviewing a case study about a certain story and they could be 14, or you could be interviewing Brad Pitt. It's just another person. And you've got to remember that they're, in the case of stars, they're used to being asked these questions all the time. They're not going to judge you. In terms of people that aren't necessarily that media savvy or haven't done media training, just make them feel as comfortable as possible. If you've gone to someone's house to do an interview, make them as comfortable and as at ease as possible. Don't be afraid to stop the interview and say, do you need a minute or anything like that, because you're going to get more out of them if they feel like they can really talk to you. Also, something that I think is really important for younger people, I don't want to generalize, but picking up the phone is very, very important. It's such an important skill that I used to be terrified of picking up the phone, talk to someone on the phone. I would rather do a chat bot. I would rather email someone, anything to not talk to them on the phone. Now it's just part of the job. Pick up the phone, talk to someone, your friends, your family, ask them questions so that you're not afraid. And I think that is a really important skill, that if you can't do it, you're not probably going to get the job.
Absolutely. Thanks very much, Kat. And over to yourself, Dan.
Yeah, if in the case of talking to ordinary members of the public or people who aren't used to being on camera, then it's absolutely, I mean, you've got to understand that they're probably more nervous than you are, and it's vital to put them at ease. And if that takes, I mean, I don't know how much, it obviously depends on how much time you have, but if you've got you've got plenty of time to get the interview done, then absolutely at the beginning, just devote a few moments, 5-10 minutes to relaxing them, getting into a nice, you don't want people to seize up on camera or feel uncomfortable. So it's very important to put people at ease, for sure. I think in terms of your own nerves, just sort of, swallow them and get it over and done with, and just take the plunge. People are, as Kat says, people are people. They're very, the famous people are all used to doing this sort of thing, and everyone else is probably as nervous as you are anyway. So,
thank you very much, Dan. Over to you, Debbie.
I think if it's not a Vox or a kind of on the spot interview, do your homework. There's nothing more infuriating to somebody when you ask them something that is really obvious, and it also will help you settle them if you can talk to them and demonstrate that you've actually prepared for the interview. It goes a long way to them thinking, oh yeah, they are interested in me. Okay, yeah, I'm good now. So where you can, do your homework. Doesn't matter who it is. If you have time to do homework, or Google them, or just try and find out as much about them as you can beforehand. And I would say if it's an interview you're doing over, Zoom or the radio, or especially the radio, I would say I always used to, when I first started out, if I was interviewing somebody sort of on ISDN or the phone, I always used to take my shoes off, because I can't be as tense with my shoes off. I used to read bulletins with my shoes off, because the place you normally have your shoes off is either at home or at the beach or at the pool. So that used to work for me. So find little things that work for you. And my radio script used to have all sorts of doodles, and it just used to relax me. So find something that works for you. If you're not in front of the person, that helps you kind of just get hold of those nerves and take a big gulp and go for it.
Thanks very much. That's all really, really practical advice. And it's been a fantastic discussion to date. We have about 5 minutes left. So one more question here that I think is particularly pertinent, particularly given you're all kind of in positions where you're making editorial judgments. And it's a very interesting anonymous question. But what would you do if you felt that there was a story to be told and someone else didn't want that story to be told? In an editorial setting, how would you maneuver that conflict?
I'm quite a junior member of my team. I would go to my editor. I would ask him what the reasons were behind not wanting to cover that story, whether I agreed with them or not. His word is final for radio. So unfortunately, that's just what would have to be done. But I think certainly with us at our company, there is always the opportunity to tell that story from a different platform. So what goes out on radio or on TV could be different to what goes out on Snapchat or on Instagram. And if there's a story that you see that is perhaps more focused to a non-traditional TV audience that would work well for a different platform, go over and talk to them. They're not going to say, what are you doing? They want to have these discussions and take it from there. I think there's no harm in asking. But yeah, ultimately you've got to take it to your direct manager, really.
Thanks very much. Over to you, Dan.
Yeah, I mean, you can absolutely make the case for your story, but there's always going to be a very good reason, I would imagine, that someone has said, well, we can't run this or we won't run this. So, you know, push for it, make your case, but also find out what it is that's holding your editor back. And if it's something that can be, you know, if it can be solved because you don't know, you need more comment from someone else, or you know, you need to verify something, then absolutely go back and keep working on it. But as Kat says, you know, if the editor says this isn't going to run, and it's a reason that can't be solved, then you probably, you've got to take that on the chin, but always get feedback, clearly. I think is the best way to approach that problem.
Thank you very much. And finally, Debbie, we might be able to squeeze in.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Talk to people, find out the reasons, and sometimes you will disagree, but sometimes everybody disagrees with their boss. It's just life, and you know, you'll win some of them and you'll lose some of them. So it is just kind of talking to people, find out the reason, maybe that you don't agree, but then you at least understand their reasons for it. Yeah, I've got nothing more to add. Kat and Dan, sum that one up.
Final question that came to mind for me was this. I suppose if you were to pick one word that you would be able to distill and use to discern how you've gotten to where you've gotten to in your career, one word that would describe your methodology for getting there and what keeps you going as a journalist, what would that be?
Determination. I saw that goal. I did not want to stop until I got there.
And to Dan?
Can I also have determination, or do I need to think of? Because I think
depends how determined you are, I suppose.
You know, absolutely. I mean, hard work and determination, I think, and maybe a little bit of luck. You know, being in the right place at the right time.
And finally, Debbie.
I would say kind of probably a slight variation on that. I'm very stubborn. So once I make my mind up that I'm doing something, I do it, or it's very hard to stop me from doing it if people want to stop me from doing it. But I'm stubborn, and I'll find different ways if I can't immediately do what I want to do.
It's been an absolute pleasure to speak to all three of you. I know that our audience has been engaging throughout. I've enjoyed the conversation, and I am dead certain that they have too. So thank you so much for your time. Pleasure speaking to you. That's Kat Soave from Sky News, Debbie Ramsay from BBC Newsbeat, and Dan Orton from the Wall Street Journal. And I've been Matthew Moynihan. Have a good one.
Thanks, Matthew.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.